If you remove one specific stone from an arch, the entire structure collapses. The same is true for the history of the United States. There is one state that served as the cradle of our liberty, the arsenal of our wars, and the forge of our industry. It is the place where the Declaration of Independence was signed, where the Civil War was decided, and where the steel that built modern America was born. Welcome to the Keystone State. Welcome ... to Pennsylvania. Geographically, Pennsylvania is the heart of the Mid-Atlantic. It is the only original colony that did not border the Atlantic Ocean. Yet it controlled the vital waterways of the Delaware, the Susquehanna, and the Ohio rivers. The name itself tells a story. Sylvania is Latin for woods, and Penn honors the father of the colony's founder. Together, Penn's Woods. But long before it was Penn's Woods, this was the domain of ancient and powerful nations. The Lenape lived along the Delaware River, known to European settlers as the grandfathers of the Algonquian nations. To the west were the Susquehannock, mighty warriors and traders who controlled the vast river valleys. For centuries they stewarded this land, but by the mid-1600s, European eyes were turning toward these fertile valleys, setting the stage for a unique social experiment that the world had never seen before. Long before the maps were drawn or the name Pennsylvania was ever spoken, this land was a vast, unbroken hardwood forest. It was a hunting ground, a home, and a spiritual center for thousands of years. This was not an empty wilderness waiting to be tamed. It was a complex network of nations. Most prominent were the Lenape, who called themselves the original people, inhabiting the Delaware River Valley. They lived in unfortified villages, a testament to their generally peaceful relations with neighbors. They were master agriculturalists, cultivating the Three Sisters corn, beans, and squash, and they operated under a matrilineal society where women held significant authority in land rights and family lineage. To the west, dominating the Susquehanna watershed, were the Susquehannock. Unlike the Lenape, the Susquehannock were a formidable military power. They lived in massive, fortified towns surrounded by palisades, controlling the lucrative fur trade routes that stretched from the Great Lakes to the Chesapeake Bay. However, the 1600s brought a slow-moving apocalypse. First came the Dutch and Swedes establishing small trading posts. They didn't bring armies, but they brought something deadlier: smallpox and influenza. Disease tore through the indigenous populations, destabilizing ancient power structures. By the time the English set their sights on the region, the Susquehannock had been decimated by war and plague, and the Lenape were struggling to maintain their autonomy. The stage was set for a new arrival, one that would come not with a sword, but with a piece of paper and a promise of peace. The existence of Pennsylvania is the result of a massive gambling debt. King Charles II of England owed Admiral William Penn £16,000 a fortune in the 17th century. Upon the admiral's death, the debt passed to his son. It's also named William Penn. But the younger Penn was a problem for the king. He was a member of the Society of Friends, known mockingly as Quakers. They refused to bow to nobility, refused to swear oaths, and refused to bear arms. To get rid of the detand, the troublesome Quaker, the king granted Penn 45,000 square miles of land in the New World in 1681. The king named it Pennsylvania in honor of the admiral. William Penn saw this not as a real estate venture, but as a holy experiment. He arrived in 1682 with a radical vision. While other colonies were founded on strict Puritan dogma or profit-seeking plantation systems, Pennsylvania would guarantee religious freedom for all monotheists. It became a haven for the persecuted. German Pietists, Scots-Irish Presbyterians, and English Quakers flooded in. Penn also insisted on fair dealings with the Native Americans. He famously refused to fortify Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, and paid the Lenape for their land, rather than simply seizing it. This era of peace was unique in colonial history. Philadelphia grew rapidly, utilizing a grid system that prioritized public green spaces. By the mid-1700s, it was the largest and most cosmopolitan city in British North America, a place where science, philosophy, and commerce could thrive without the heavy hand of theocracy. By the 1750s, the holy experiment was facing a violent reality check. As settlers pushed westward across the Allegheny Mountains, they encroached on territory claimed by New France. The French, determined to link their Canadian colonies with Louisiana, began building a chain of forts south from Lake Erie. The spark that set the world on fire was struck in Pennsylvania. In 1754, the governor of Virginia sent a 22-year-old surveyor named George Washington to the Pennsylvania backcountry to tell the French to leave. Things went wrong. Washington's forces ambushed a French patrol at Jumonville Glen, killing a French diplomat. Washington retreated and hastily built Fort Necessity near present-day Farmington. But was forced to surrender, the only time he ever surrendered in his military career. This skirmish ignited the French and Indian War, which exploded into the global 7 Years' War. The pacifist Quaker government in Philadelphia was paralyzed. They refused to fund a militia or build forts, even as the frontier burned. The Native American tribes, largely feeling betrayed by land swindles like the infamous Walking Purchase of 1737, allied with the French. The war brought brutal violence to Pennsylvania. In 1755, British General Edward Braddock tried to take the French Fort Duquesne, modern-day Pittsburgh, and was massacred in the woods. The Quaker government's inability to defend its citizens led to their political decline. By the time the British finally captured Fort Duquesne in 1750, renaming it Pittsburgh, the pacifist era was dead. Pennsylvania was now a hardened, fortified frontier, and the seeds of American military independence had been sown in its western woods. As the dust settled from the war with France, a new conflict brewed, this time with the mother country. By the 1770s, tensions over taxation without representation were boiling. When the colonies needed a central meeting place to discuss resistance, all roads led to Philadelphia. It was the geographic center of the colonies, the most populous city, and the intellectual hub of America. In 1774, the First Continental Congress met at Carpenter's Hall to address the intolerable acts. But it was the Second Continental Congress, convening in May 1775 at the Pennsylvania State House, now Independence Hall, that changed history. The atmosphere in Philadelphia was electric and dangerous. Pennsylvania itself was deeply divided. It had a massive population of pacifist Quakers and Loyalists who opposed war with Britain. The delegation, led by cautious men like John Dickinson, hesitated to break away. However, the momentum was undeniable. Under the influence of Pennsylvania's own Benjamin Franklin and the radical voices from New England, the tide turned. The stifling heat of July 1776, the delegates voted for independence. The Declaration was read aloud for the first time on July 8th in the State House yard. To the ringing of the bell that would later be known as the Liberty Bell, Pennsylvania had transformed from a colony of peace into the capital of treason, hosting the government that would challenge the mightiest empire on earth. Declaring independence was one thing. Curing it was another. For Pennsylvania, the war was not a distant headline. It was an occupation. In the fall of 1777, the British Army set their sights on Philadelphia, the rebel capital. George Washington tried to stop them. He fought the British at the Battle of Brandywine in September and again at Germantown in October. He lost both times. The Continental Congress was forced to flee the city. Scattering to Lancaster and York, the British marched triumphantly into Philadelphia, enjoying warm quarters and balls, while the American army retreated to a high plateau known as Valley Forge. The winter of 1777 to 1778 at Valley Forge is the emotional nadir of the American Revolution. It wasn't a battle against redcoats. It was a battle against the elements. Of the 12,000 soldiers who marched in, 2,000 died of disease, malnutrition, and exposure. But something miraculous happened in that Pennsylvania snow. A Prussian military officer, Baron von Steuben, arrived to train the ragtag militia. He taught them how to march, how to fire in unison, and how to use the bayonet. Washington, meanwhile, solidified his leadership, holding the army together through sheer force of will. When they marched out of Valley Forge in June 1778 to chase the British across New Jersey, they were no longer a disorganized mob. They were a professional army. Pennsylvania had been the crucible. The suffering endured on its soil forged the weapon that would eventually win the war. As the 19th century dawned, the holy experiment was over. The Industrial Revolution had begun, and Pennsylvania held the keys to the future beneath its soil. Before there were highways, Pennsylvania undertook one of the most ambitious engineering feats in history, the main line of public works. A system of canals and railroads designed to conquer the Appalachian Mountains. It connected Philadelphia in the east to Pittsburgh in the west. This artery allowed goods and people to flow freely, turning Pittsburgh into the gateway to the west. But the real revolution wasn't on the surface. It was underground. In the northeastern mountains, miners discovered anthracite coal, a hard, clean-burning fuel that burned hotter than wood. Suddenly, Pennsylvania was powering the nation's steam engines. Then, in 1859, the world changed forever in a quiet corner of northwestern Pennsylvania. In Titusville, a man named Edwin Drake drilled the world's first commercial oil well. Before this, oil was skimmed off creeks or rendered from oil. Drake proved it could be pumped from the earth, almost overnight. The region exploded into a black gold rush that rivaled the California gold rush. Boom towns like Pithole City rose from the mud in months and vanished just as quickly. Pennsylvania was now the energy capital of the planet, producing the kerosene that lit the lamps of the world. The age of fossil fuels had begun, right here in the Keystone State. Pennsylvania's southern border, the Mason-Dixon line, was more than a boundary on a map. By 1861, it was the scar separating freedom from slavery. When the Civil War erupted, Pennsylvania became the arsenal of the Union, providing crucial iron, food, and manpower. But the war didn't stay south of the line. In June 1863, Confederate General Robert E. Lee launched a daring invasion of the North. He aimed to demoralize the Union by striking deep into Pennsylvania. The two massive armies collided by chance at a crossroads town called Gettysburg. For 3 days in July, the fate of the United States hung in the balance. It was the bloodiest battle ever fought in the Western Hemisphere, resulting in 51,000 casualties. The hills of Pennsylvania ran red. The Union defense held, forcing Lee to retreat, a defeat from which the Confederacy never fully recovered. 4 months later, President Abraham Lincoln traveled to the battlefield to dedicate a cemetery for the fallen. In just 272 words, the Gettysburg Address redefined the war. He declared that the nation was not just a collection of states, but a single entity dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Pennsylvania had been the birthplace of the nation in 1776. At Gettysburg, it became the place of its rebirth. After the war, the United States began to build up. And to build up, you need steel. Western Pennsylvania, specifically Pittsburgh, sat at the convergence of 3 rivers, surrounded by endless coal deposits. It was the perfect location for the blast furnace. Enter Andrew Carnegie, a Scottish immigrant who grasped the power of the Bessemer process, a way to mass-produce steel cheaply. Carnegie Steel became the first billion-dollar corporation in the world. The rails that crossed the continent, the bridges that spanned the rivers, and the skeletons of New York's first skyscrapers were all forged in the Steel City. But this industrial might came at a human cost. The steel mills were dangerous, hot, and brutal. Workers toiled 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. When they demanded better conditions, the clash was violent. The Homestead Strike of 1892 turned into a literal battle between workers and private mercenaries, leaving huge scars on the labor movement. This was the Gilded Age. While tycoons built mansions and libraries, Pennsylvania's coal patches and mill towns saw the rise of a hardened labor force. Setting the stage for the workers' rights movements of the 20th century, in the first half of the 20th century, Pennsylvania was the engine of the American war machine. During World War I and World War II, the state's factories produced more steel, munitions, and ships than entire countries. It was truly the arsenal of democracy. The middle class boomed, and Pennsylvania became a symbol of blue-collar prosperity. But the higher you climb, the harder you fall. By the 1970s and 80s, the global economy shifted. Steel production moved overseas. Coal demand plummeted. The collapse was swift and devastating. Massive mills that had employed generations of families shut their gates forever. Towns were decimated by unemployment. This region became the heart of the Rust Belt. Pennsylvania lost residents, political clout, and its identity as the industrial titan. It was a painful period of transition, forcing the state to ask a difficult question. What is Pennsylvania without steel and coal? The answer to that question is resilience. Today, Pennsylvania has reinvented itself. Pittsburgh, once choked by smoke, is now a global hub for robotics, healthcare, and education. Driven by universities like Carnegie Mellon, Philadelphia remains a cultural and biomedical powerhouse, connecting its rich history with a modern economy. Beyond the cities, agriculture remains vital. Pennsylvania is the snack food capital of the world, the nation's top producer of mushrooms, and a leader in dairy. From the Amish country of Lancaster to the natural gas fields of the Marcellus Shale, the state continues to energize and feed the nation. Looking back at the timeline, the story is clear. Pennsylvania is the keystone. It was the geographic center of the colonies, the political center of the Revolution, the military turning point of the Civil War, and the industrial forge of the 20th century. It is a state founded on a holy experiment that became the workshop of the world. It proves that while industries may rise and fall, the spirit of reinvention endures. Narrator, thank you for joining us on this journey through history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Keystone State, please hit the like button and subscribe. Let us know in the comments, which state's history should we cover next? Till next time, keep looking back to move forward. In many ways, the story of Pennsylvania is simply the story of America writ large. It began with a promise of tolerance in a savage world. It matured through the fires of revolution and the agony of civil war. It built the muscles of a superpower with its iron and coal, and it learned the hard lessons of loss when the factories went quiet. But like America, Pennsylvania is defined not by its darkest winters at Valley Forge, but by the spring that always follows. It is a land of reinvention. From the Liberty Bell to the Research Lab, the spirit remains the same: grit, innovation, and an unwavering belief in the future. Thank you for watching this history of the Keystone State. If you learned something new today, please hit that like button, it really helps the channel. And do not forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next journey into the past. I'm U.S. State History, and I'll see you in the next chapter of history.